From toys and t-shirts to cars and phones, China is at the top of the global value pyramid. Now China's electric cars are going premium. European brands are starting to get a little bit scared. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm the Electric Viking. Great to see you here. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for supporting the electric vehicle revolution. And really, it's just the common sense revolution, isn't it? On the Mediterranean island of Corsica, halfway between Marseille and the Italian shore, stands a rental car lot fitted with Europe's finest vehicles. German Audis, Italian Fiats, and French Peugeots. Lately, it has featured a new offering, an electric SUV in silver or azure with an alien logo, 5 oblong plates arrayed in the shape of an X. The brand is Aways, a portmanteau of the Mandarin word for love and the English phrase on the way. Love on the way. The rental agent Hertz Corsica recruited the help of Aways, an all-electric Chinese startup that you've probably never heard of, as part of an island-wide electrification scheme in the summer of 2020. We looked at our historical suppliers, but they didn't have enough volume to offer us anything, said Jean-Noel Filippo, the general manager, to French media. The Aways Corsica deal appeared to subvert the once universal symbol of Europe as the leading manufacturer of cars. China's electric vehicle fleet has recently put the rest of the world's markets on notice. There are around 50 Chinese electric car companies making cutting-edge electric cars and components, over a dozen of which are now selling in Europe. Aways was founded in Shanghai in 2017 and began exporting its first model, the all-electric battery-powered U5, to Europe just 1 year later. In 2021, the newcomer sold more than 1,000 units to 11 European countries, including the Netherlands, France, and Denmark. Europe is now beachhead for Aways and many other up-and-coming Chinese EV brands, NIO, XPeng, etc. Across China's industrial heartland, high-tech goods are replacing the cheap fare of yesteryear, the shoes, trinkets, and paraphernalia of Western suburbia. In the next stage of Chinese growth, the electric vehicle is the trump card. It represents disruption of the world's largest industry. Not long ago, Japan and South Korea made a similar journey west, vying in markets long synonymous with great powers and modernity. COVID has fueled the growth of Chinese EV companies, and this is how. Ambitious emissions targets and the lack of indigenous players are opening the European auto market up to Chinese imports. Under the EU's climate plan, 30 million electric cars must be sold by 2030. Last year, despite record sales, only 2.2 million EVs were sold in Europe. While traditional European marquees like Renault, Volkswagen, and Fiat have promised a full-throated pivot to electric cars, they are held back by the internal combustion engine past. With very few pure electric startups raised on European soil, the continent is structurally receptive to new entrants with green DNA. China accounts for half of all electric vehicles sold globally. In fact, now it's more than half. Last year, 3.5 million of them hit Chinese roads, well over double the year prior. That number will double again this year. The burst of enthusiasm is partly the outgrowth of a decades-long policy blueprint. It was not an advantage for China to be dependent on a carbon-based energy supply chain. Bill Russell, founder and CEO of Automobility Limited, an advisory firm in Shanghai, said, "To wean itself off fossil fuels, the Gatorade of American imperialism, national documents began mulling plans for renewable energy and electrification as early as the 1980s. 3 decades later, the head start has turned into a massive lead for China." China's electric car armada can be sorted into 3 groups. They include pure Chinese startups such as XPeng, NIO, Aways, Weltmeister, and Nita. Legacy manufacturers such as Great Wall Motors, BYD, SAIC, and Geely, with Volvo's Polestar, Zeekr, Lynk & Co. The last of 3 jointly owned by Geely. NIO, a New York-listed startup from Shanghai with deep pockets, began selling its SUVs in Norway last year. In December, it announced plans to expand to 25 countries by 2025, along with XPeng as well doing the same thing, and those countries include Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden. The company is also planning a US entry, hiring marketing strategists in San Jose, California, and raising capital through a secondary listing in Hong Kong. Paradoxically, the pandemic has helped the new Chinese entrants. The $1.2 trillion economic stimulus package passed by the European Parliament in 2020 included incentives for electric car purchases, although the subsidies benefited both Chinese startups and traditional European automakers. The Davids and Goliaths pandemic supply shocks disproportionately hit Europe. The traditional OEMs in Europe, all of them had a shortage in components and therefore sold less cars than they did before the pandemic. Alex Close, an executive overseeing AWA's European expansion, said on the China EVs and More podcast, there is a space in the market that isn't fulfilled. In that space, China sees the chance for a takeover. While Japan Inc. elicits the image of well-oiled lines, China Inc. has long evoked dirty factory floors and the smell of burnt plastic. If Chinese car brands have no influence in the international arena, said Wei Yanjun, the chairman of Great Wall Motors, then the efforts of the past 20 years will have been squandered. Liberals talk ceaselessly of China's efforts to revive the international order, a chess game led by hard-nosed politicians with planes, tanks, and suits. But there is a softer reputational revision currently underway, led by ambitious, sometimes zany entrepreneurs with massive budgets. Batteries are the key advantages of China over the West. In their quest to become household names in the West, Chinese auto manufacturers are facing somewhat of a battle. Chinese products have a history in Europe with regards to cars, which is not the best, Alex Close, after-sales director of AWA's Europe, said. For example, in 2006, the automaker Yangling Motors debuted its new Landwind New Vision at the Frankfurt Auto Show. But their hopes to become a global brand were dashed when a crash test by the German Automobile Club, ADAC, found that the car disintegrated upon impact. But much has changed in the coming decades. For one, the technology tables have turned. China did not have a domestic automotive industry at the time, said Russo. All the core IP around the internal combustion engine, it didn't have ownership of the invention. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Chinese cars were practically carbon copies of overseas brands. Now, in the electric vehicle era, it is China that holds the intellectual property keys for this technology. Batteries are the pillar of China's competitive advantage, and it is a big advantage. BYD, one of China's largest battery and car makers, was one of the first to sell a plug-in hybrid into European markets in 2011. 4 years later, the Shenzhen-based manufacturer bested 4 automakers in a contest to supply electric buses to the Amsterdam airport. With cost-effective LFP batteries, Chinese EVs are now beyond price competitive. They set the standard when it comes to price. Last year, BYD's flagship EV brand, the Tang, sold over 1,000 units in Norway 4 months after it came to market, and at premium prices too. BYD outsold Tesla in China last year, and NIO and XPeng rank ahead of the Volkswagen ID3 and ID4 in China, the third and fourth best-selling electric brands in Europe. China is pushing the frontier of EV software. Today, some of China's largest tech and internet companies like Huawei, Alibaba, and Baidu provide the digital backbone of China's electric vehicles. Smart cars identify consumer pain points via big data or execute software updates like an iPhone. China's EV Inc. staff are dominated by software developers, said Tu Li, partner of Sino Auto Insights. Foreign car imports face a 10% tariff in Europe, but China is still beyond price competitive, even with that handicap, according to the consultancy firm Jato Dynamics. The cost of new electric cars has nearly halved in China since 2011, while the average price of their European competitors has risen. Legacy brands also face higher overhead costs, so the smaller, nimbler, faster Chinese car makers are able to pivot better into a rapidly evolving auto industry. China EV Inc. has a blank slate, said Li. They can try new things quickly, dipping their toes in local markets and course correct if things don't immediately work. You may not know this, but Chinese companies are actually behind European EV brands. Many Chinese brands approach Europe in the leery manner China approached liberalization, crossing the river while feeling for the stones. They try to do it in a very controlled manner, said Victor Earle, co-founder of EV Volumes, a global electric vehicle data platform. Not growing too fast, most likely on purpose, so that they can control the customer experience and collect as much input as humanly possible, or at least as possible using big data. NIO and Xpeng first set up a beachhead in Norway, the most electrified car market in the world. Both have yet to break the 1,000 sales mark in the cars. Yet Norwegian citizens can already find a high-end 2,150 square meter NIO showroom in downtown Oslo. The toe dipping reflects the behavior of a more experienced industry. Close, who worked previously at Jaguar, Land Rover, Ford and Volvo before joining Airways in 2018, says he learned many things from his Asian predecessors. We don't just send cars which don't fit to European taste or to European driving habits, he said, referring to past mishaps by Japan and Korean auto companies. If you come to China and say, do you want to have my car? How many cars do you want? 500. Okay, we'll send you 500. That doesn't work at all. Cars are an emotional product. And Europeans, for the most part, like to buy locally in Europe. As a result, Close fixates on relationships, including cultivating auto after-sales networks, working closely with importers, and building strong customer service teams. While some Chinese automakers focus on brand, many are already big players in Europe in more subtle ways. Some of the best-selling European brands, like the former British MG, are now Chinese-owned. This will only accelerate in future as brands go bankrupt. Meanwhile, European brands are inexorably tied to China. BMW's iX3 began production in Shenyang, and many of Europe's Tesla Model 3s were imported from its factory in Shanghai. BMW and Volkswagen, as with most Chinese upstarts like NIO, Xpeng and Airways, are powered by CATL batteries, the world's largest battery company headquartered in China. So China's ascent up the global value chain is the most vivid in the electric vehicle space. Here in Europe, European consumers are already buying Chinese not just for price, but also for quality and performance. Remember, the CEO of Volkswagen, Herbert Diess, said this when he was asked who Volkswagen's competitors are: Tesla and China, not BMW or Mercedes. There are still risks, of course. In the past, Europe's lawmakers imposed quotas on Japanese cars. Chinese EVs could face something similar when entire market disruption becomes evident. Then there's data privacy. Just as Tesla is beholden to Chinese data security laws, Chinese EVs will be headed for a collision with Europe's stringent GDPR regulations. But the product speaks for itself. One of our first customers was a guy who had just seen the car tested on YouTube, and he said, yes, I'll buy it. I've seen the guy testing it. I saw what he did with it, and I'm happy. I'll just buy it, said Close, recounting on a podcast recently. And by the way, the guy was 70 years old. So yes, now that we have the internet, it's much easier for people to hear about these new Chinese car brands and to feel some level of trust with buying them. Inside the halls of the French Parliament, during the summer of 2020, the chairman of Renault, Jean-Dominique Serrard, warned French lawmakers of ferocious competition coming from China as Europe remained crippled by the pandemic. We have to recover quickly to be able to counter these new entrants, he said. Just across the Mediterranean, on Corsica's craggy peaks, French vacationers whiled away the pandemic months on their electric Airways, getting a taste of what these new Chinese automakers have to offer. If you've been watching this channel for a while now, you would know that immense disruption is coming from Tesla and from China. The global automotive market will look very different in 10 years' time, which is why I suggest, why not get on and invest in the future? This is what I've done. This is what I think you should do. But don't just take it from me. Do your research and make your own decision on that. There's a few videos on my channel that talk about electric car companies that you can invest in now for the future. I'll put some links in the description below. Now, the majority of this video is provided by Chang Chi from supchina.com. I'll put a link to the original article in the description below as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again on the next one. Bye-bye.